Marble columns stand silent now, but they once echoed with the roar of ancient crowds. We are learning to hear those lost worlds again through the science of acoustic archaeology. This journey will reconstruct the soundscapes of places like Rome and Babylon, transforming silent ruins back into vibrant cities. You will discover how a whisper in a Maya temple could mimic a sacred bird, and why Roman emperors banned chariots to curb noise pollution. By the end, your understanding of history will be fundamentally rewired, adding a rich layer of sound to the silent past. How did the ordered sounds of a Chinese capital enforce imperial power? What secrets do the echoes in a Greek theater hold about democracy itself? What would you most want to hear from a civilization that vanished 2,000 years ago? An archaeologist's most vital tool is no longer just a brush, but a microphone and a powerful computer. This is the world of acoustic archaeology, a field dedicated to listening to the echoes of the past. Experts call it archaeoacoustics, an interdisciplinary science that merges traditional digging with the physics of sound, the study of music, and digital reconstruction. As leading researcher Professor Miriam Kohler explains, the goal is not merely to recreate old noises, but to decode a fundamental layer of human communication and experience. She suggests that sound was a crucial, yet often invisible, ingredient in ancient city life. It shaped how people built their temples and theaters, how they practiced their religion, and how they gathered in public spaces. The methodology is as fascinating as it is precise. Researchers take detailed acoustic measurements of ruins, capturing how sound reflects off ancient stone. They scour historical texts for any mention of bells, street vendors, or ceremonial chants. Then they feed all this data into sophisticated computer models to simulate exactly how a speech would have carried in a Roman forum or a prayer would have resonated in a Maya bowl court. This process transforms a silent, skeletal ruin back into the vibrant, noisy heart of a community. How would your perception of history shift if you could suddenly hear the world as an ancient citizen did? With this foundation of listening to the past, we can now examine the remarkable digital tools that make this auditory time travel a reality. A single clap echoes through the vast stone forest of Karnak's columns, the sound bouncing and lingering for an astonishing 11 seconds. This simple act of making a noise and listening is the essence of architectural acoustics, a foundational method for reconstructing ancient soundscapes. Researchers are not just hearing random echoes, they are decoding a sophisticated language of sound intentionally built into the stones. In places like the grand amphitheaters of Greece, the architecture itself acts as a natural amplifier. The steep, semicircular seating captures a speaker's voice and projects it upwards, allowing even those in the highest tiers to hear every word with remarkable clarity, a necessity for the birth of democratic debate. This is not an accident of design. It is acoustic engineering on a monumental scale. To measure these effects with scientific precision, experts use tools like impulse response measurements, which work like a sonic camera flash to map how sound reflects off every surface. They also employ three-dimensional laser scanners to create perfect digital replicas of the ruins. These virtual models become acoustic laboratories, allowing scientists to test how different sounds would have behaved millennia ago. One of the most famous examples is the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. A whisper spoken at the base of its grand staircase can be heard with perfect clarity at the temple's summit, far across the plaza. This was not a parlor trick. It was likely a deliberate feature for ceremonial use, allowing a priest's words to travel as if carried by the gods themselves. These ancient builders possessed an intuitive mastery of physics, shaping stone to guide whispers and project chants long before the science of sound was formally defined. The echoes we hear today are not ghosts. They are the preserved fingerprints of a civilization's auditory intent. But these man-made sounds were only one part of the urban symphony. Beyond the temples and theaters, the natural world contributed its own powerful voice to the ancient city. That ambient murmur of daily life formed the constant acoustic canvas upon which ancient civilizations painted their grandest sounds. This second method of reconstruction listens not to the intentional echoes of temples, but to the sonic environment of nature and urban life itself. Think of a Mesopotamian dawn. The sun rises not in silence, but to a growing chorus of sheep bleating from mud brick pens, the steady flow of water through irrigation canals, and the first sharp clangs of a coppersmith's hammer striking metal. This was the city's acoustic backdrop, a rich tapestry woven from countless everyday sources. To reconstruct it, researchers become sonic detectives. They identify animal populations by studying archaeological finds of bones and enclosures, then layer in modern recordings of those species. They map the intricate layouts of aqueducts and fountains, calculating the persistent rush and gurgle of water that was the lifeblood of any settlement. They even analyze ancient climate data and building materials to understand how wind would have whistled through a narrow street or how rain drummed on a terracotta tile roof. A study of Pompeii offers a vivid example. By examining the deep ruts worn into its stone streets, we can almost hear the relentless clatter of iron-rimmed cartwheels. The layout of open-air taverns with their marble counters suggests the constant hum of conversation and the clinking of ceramic cups. This was the noise floor of the ancient world, a persistent layer of sound that shaped human perception and interaction. It was against this backdrop of bleating livestock and flowing water that a priest's chant or a politician's speech had to compete for attention. Understanding this ambient soundscape is crucial. It transforms a silent ruin into a living, breathing space, reminding us that history was not a quiet place. It provides the essential context for the next layer of sound, the one ancient people deliberately designed to cut through the daily din and communicate everything from divine will to imperial power. A beautifully preserved lyre from a pharaoh's tomb holds more than gold and ivory. It contains the ghost of a melody, a sequence of notes last heard by ears that closed thousands of years ago. This is the third method of acoustic reconstruction, deciphering the intentional sounds crafted by ancient hands from instruments and musical artifacts. When archaeologists uncover a bone flute in Germany or a set of bronze bells in China, they are not just cataloging objects, they are recovering the physical components of a lost musical language. To understand this language, researchers employ technology as a kind of time machine. CT scans peer inside a terracotta rattle to see its clapper, revealing the precise rattle it would have made. Material science analyzes the composition of a metal bell or the tension a string could bear, allowing artisans to build perfect, playable replicas. The results are breathtaking. The Sumerian lyres excavated from the royal tombs of Ur have been meticulously reconstructed. For the first time in over 4,500 years, the deep, resonant tones of these great bull-headed instruments have filled the air, their voices both alien and profoundly moving. But the instruments themselves are only half the story. The walls of tombs and the surfaces of painted pottery are frozen concert halls. A fresco in Pompeii shows a flautist keeping rhythm for a dancer. An Egyptian relief depicts a harpist's exact hand position. This iconographic evidence is a priceless record of playing techniques and ensemble arrangements, showing us how different sounds were woven together. What does this recovered music tell us? It reveals the mathematical soul of a culture, its preferred scales and harmonies. It shows us that music was not merely entertainment. In Rome, specific brass instruments, like the curved cornu, blasted commands across a chaotic battlefield. In the Andes, the haunting sound of a pututu shell trumpet called people to ceremony, its voice carrying for miles across the mountains. We are not just hearing old notes, we are listening to the tools of social control, spiritual connection, and communal identity. And once you know the music, a compelling question naturally arises. What words were sung to these melodies? What stories did these rhythms accompany? The search for the music of the past inevitably leads us to the search for the human voice itself. That reconstructed prayer to Isis, spoken with its authentic vowels and clicks, transforms a silent temple into a sacred space once more. This is the fourth method, linguistic reconstruction, which gives voice to the people themselves. Scholars dedicated to this work are not just translating ancient texts, they are reviving the very sounds of speech, a field known as historical phonology. To rebuild a lost accent, they act as auditory detectives. They analyze poetry where the meter and rhyme scheme lock in specific pronunciations. They compare a mother language to its many descendants, tracing how sounds evolve over centuries. They even study the mistakes of ancient scribes, whose misspellings can reveal how words were actually said, not just how they were supposed to be written. The Latin spoken by Julius Caesar, for example, sounded profoundly different from the church Latin we might know today. The restored pronunciation is guttural and sharp, with hard C's that sound like K's and V's pronounced like W's. Veni, vidi, vis, I would have been thundered as WHNE, we D, we key, a far cry from the softer, more melodic version we are used to. This precise reconstruction allows for powerful acoustic experiments. Picture a politician standing on the rostra in the Roman Forum, his voice competing with the city's ambient noise. With a digital model of the space and the restored Latin pronunciation, we can simulate how many people in that vast crowd could actually understand his words. The clarity of his plosive consonants and open vowels would have been the difference between a message that inspired a mob and one that was simply lost on the wind. This work reveals that oratory was not just about the words chosen, but about their physical sound and its journey through the air. Hearing these resurrected voices forces a profound question. In a city filled with so many competing sounds, from chanting priests to clattering carts, who had the power to control the auditory space, the search for the human voice leads directly to a virtual reality headset, where the silent stones of Angkor Wat suddenly roar back to life. This is Auralization, the fifth and most technologically advanced method for reconstructing ancient soundscapes. The term describes the process of making digital acoustic data audible, transforming mathematical calculations into a sensory experience you can actually hear. It all begins with a perfect three-dimensional digital model of a site, built from painstaking laser scans and archaeological surveys. This virtual replica is then fed into sophisticated acoustic simulation software, a kind of sonic physics engine. The software calculates precisely how a sound wave would behave, factoring in the density of a marble wall, the porous texture of a limestone block, or even the humidity of the air on a specific day. Researchers can input the exact location of a sound source, like a singer in a temple's inner sanctum, and then move a virtual listener to any other point in the model to hear the result. This allows for incredible virtual experiments. You can stand in the very last row of the theater of Epidaurus in Greece and test whether a whisper from the stage truly could have been heard with perfect clarity. You can simulate how the thunder of a nearby waterfall would have masked or magnified a shaman's chant in a Maya cave ceremony. The software accounts for every echo, every muffled absorption by a wooden roof long since turned to dust, and every diffraction of sound around a corner. This method bridges the final gap between cold data and lived experience, turning abstract numbers into the immersive sensation of a monsoon downpour drumming on a temple roof. It provides the most complete answer yet to the question of what it truly felt like to listen in the ancient world. With this powerful tool in hand, we are finally ready to step into the first great city whose sonic world we can attempt to fully resurrect. Rome was a city that never slept, and its defining feature was an overwhelming wall of noise. A million voices created a dense sonic tapestry where the sacred, the political, and the profane fought for auditory space. Step into the Subura district at dawn, and the air would already be thick with the relentless hammering of coppersmiths, the shouts of vendors hawking their wares, and the squabbling of families living in cramped, insular apartments. This was the city's relentless industrial hum. Then came the political pulse from the Forum Romanum. Here, orators faced an immense acoustic challenge. Their speeches had to cut through the ambient din of the city, forcing them to develop a powerful, projecting delivery. A weak voice was a political liability in a space where sound could easily be swallowed by the surrounding architecture and the murmur of the crowd. Just a short walk away, the public baths offered a different kind of soundscape, a social symphony of splashing water, the slaps of masseurs, the grunts of men exercising, and the constant, layered murmur of gossip and deal-making. But perhaps the most infamous source of noise was the traffic. Iron-rimmed cartwheels grinding on stone-paved streets created a deafening clatter that reverberated through entire neighborhoods. The problem became so intolerable that Julius Caesar was forced to enact one of the earliest known noise pollution laws, banning chariots from the city during daytime hours. Using digital models based on sites like the well-preserved port of Ostia Antiquae, acoustic archaeologists can now simulate this chaotic orchestra. The reconstructions reveal a soundscape that was both vibrantly alive and intensely stressful, a constant sensory assault that would be almost unrecognizable compared to the serene, silent ruins we walk through today. This Roman benchmark of urban cacophony sets the stage for a profound contrast, a journey to a civilization that sought not to amplify human noise, but to harmonize it with the very voice of the earth itself. While Rome's noise was a testament to human industry, the Maya world resonated with the voice of the gods themselves. In a city like Tikal, under a blanket of stars, the air would thrum with a different kind of power. A priest standing atop a towering pyramid would blow into a massive conch shell trumpet, its deep, mournful wail rolling across the Grand Plaza and echoing into the surrounding jungle. This was not merely a signal, it was an invocation, a sound believed to tear the veil between the earthly realm and the world of the spirits. The Maya understood their universe as a living, sonic entity, and they engineered their entire environment to communicate with it. Their architecture was a resonant instrument crafted with breathtaking acoustic intentionality. The most famous example is the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. A single clap at the base of its monumental staircase is transformed as it travels upward, returning to the listener not as a simple echo, but as a piercing chirp that perfectly mimics the cry of the sacred Quetzal bird. This was no architectural accident. It was a deliberate sonic marvel, a way to make the spirit of the feathered serpent god audibly present for all to hear. The sacred ball courts, where ritual games held profound cosmological significance, are also acoustic wonders. The parallel walls of these long, narrow courts create a strange and powerful auditory phenomenon known as a flutter echo. A sound made at the center of the court bounces back and forth between the walls with such rapid intensity that it becomes distorted and otherworldly. A whisper could be amplified into a booming, disembodied voice. Can you imagine the psychological impact on the players and spectators? It would have seemed as if the gods themselves were shouting from the stones, commenting on the game's divine outcome. This mastery of sound extended to the instruments held in human hands. Archaeologists have uncovered ocarinas and whistles carved from clay that produce shrill calls mimicking jaguars and eagles. They have found raspers made from human femurs, their grating, percussive scrape designed to induce altered states of consciousness during shamanic rituals. Every element of this reconstructed soundscape points to a single, profound truth. For the Maya, sound was a direct medium for divine interaction, a physical force to summon, appease, and embody the supernatural. Their cities were not just silent stone calendars, they were vast, resonant instruments tuned to the frequency of the cosmos. This deeply spiritual approach to sound presents a stunning contrast to the next civilization we will hear, one that harnessed the power of organized noise not for the gods, but for the absolute authority of the state. In the ancient capital of Chang'an, a city bell tolled with the precision of a state decree. This was not the chaotic roar of Rome or the supernatural whisper of Tikal. It was the sound of absolute order, an auditory blueprint for a perfectly governed society. The Tang Dynasty engineered its capital as a grand instrument of control, and its soundscape was the melody it played. The city's grid layout, with its immense boulevards and heavily walled wards, carved the urban space into distinct acoustic territories. The eastern and western markets would have been a cacophony of haggling merchants and clattering workshops, yet their noise was contained, prevented from spilling into the quiet, elite residential quarters where the only sounds were the rustle of silk and the murmured discussions of scholars. This physical separation created a sonic hierarchy, mirroring the rigid social structure itself. The most powerful sounds were those of authority. At the center of this acoustic control were the drum and bell towers. These structures did not merely tell time, they commanded it. Their synchronized beats marked the opening and closing of the massive city gates, dictating the flow of human life, signaling curfews, and segmenting the day into official blocks. To hear the watch night drum was to know the state's schedule was your own. The imperial court took this sonic order to its highest form. Its music, known as yeyu, was a complex and deeply formalized art. Every note, every rhythm, and the specific arrangement of stone chimes and bronze bells was codified in state ritual. This was not entertainment. It was a form of sonic governance, a performance believed to maintain the mandate of heaven and ensure cosmic harmony for the entire empire. The music's rigid structure was a direct auditory expression of the social order it was designed to protect. Even the pervasive sounds of religion were co-opted into this system. The chanting from Buddhist monasteries and the ringing of temple bells, while spiritually significant, also served to reinforce the state-approved rhythm of daily life. Reconstructing Chang'an's soundscape reveals a civilization that understood a profound truth. Controlling what people heard was a direct path to controlling how they behaved and what they believed. This mastery of organized public sound makes you wonder, how did this principle translate to a society built not on imperial command, but on the raised hands of its citizens? The Athenian agora did not echo with the commands of an emperor, but with the collective voice of its citizens. Here, sound was not a tool for control, but the very medium of democracy itself. This bustling public square was a sonic marketplace of ideas, where the haggling of fishmongers blended seamlessly with the heated debates of philosophers and the earnest legal arguments of citizens preparing for court. Every voice, in theory, had the right to be heard. The most critical sounds of all originated just a short walk away on the Phoenix Hill. This was the open-air meeting place of the Athenian assembly, where thousands of male citizens gathered to vote on matters of war, peace, and policy. The acoustics here were functional but far from perfect. A speaker had to project his voice against the wind, competing with the ambient murmur of the massive crowd. Historical accounts tell us it was often difficult to hear, forcing orators to develop powerful, clear delivery. This was acoustic democracy in its rawest form, imperfect and challenging, mirroring the messy, human reality of self-governance. Just below the Acropolis, the Theatre of Dionysus offered a more refined auditory experience. Its brilliant design ensured that every one of its thousands of spectators could hear every whispered line of a Sophocles tragedy or the biting satire of an Aristophanes comedy. This was not mere entertainment. These plays were vital civic rituals exploring complex moral and political questions that resonated directly with the audience's roles as jurors and voters. The sound of a chorus questioning the nature of justice in a play would have directly influenced the sound of a citizen arguing for justice in the assembly the next day. And then there were the everyday symphonies of Athenian life. In the barber shops, the constant chatter was not just gossip but political discussion. At evening symposia, the recitation of epic poetry over wine reinforced shared cultural values. The rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer was the sound of the city's economic engine. Unlike the segmented, controlled soundscape of Chang'an, Athens was an acoustic free-for-all. Persuasion, not command, was the goal. A citizen had to be a skilled listener, able to discern truth in a courtroom speech, wisdom in a philosophical argument, and value in a merchant's pitch. The entire soundscape trained its people for participation, reconstructing the roar of the agora and the strained orations on the Phoenix gives us more than just noise. It lets us hear the sound of freedom itself, a chaotic and vibrant din that formed the bedrock of Western political thought. A modern archaeologist's toolkit now holds condenser microphones and acoustic cameras alongside traditional trowels. This technological leap has fundamentally changed our ability to listen to history, moving us from educated guesswork into the realm of scientifically grounded simulation. The process begins with three-dimensional laser scanners, often called LiDAR. These devices fire millions of laser points at a ruin, building a digital replica so precise it captures every crack and contour of the ancient stone. This model becomes the virtual stage for all subsequent acoustic experiments, the silent digital canvas waiting for sound. To populate this canvas, researchers use specialized microphones that capture sound in a full 360-degree sphere. These ambisonic microphones are deployed in modern environments that serve as acoustic proxies for the past. To understand how a Roman street might have sounded, scientists might record a cart on a cobblestone lane in a preserved historic town. That real-world recording then becomes the raw audio material, which is mapped onto the virtual model. Then comes the computational magic. Sophisticated software like Odeon and Cat Acoustic takes over. These programs act as virtual physics engines for sound. Using algorithms based on geometric acoustics, they simulate millions of virtual sound rays, tracing the path of each one as it would bounce off a marble floor, be absorbed by a long-vanished wooden roof, or diffract around a stone column. The software calculates everything from the reverberation time in a Maya tomb to the intelligibility of a speech in the Roman Senate. For ancient music, the tools are equally advanced. Spectral analysis software can take an audio recording of a reconstructed bone flute and break down its sound into a precise graph of its component frequencies. This allows researchers to identify the instrument's resonant peaks and its unique sonic signature, comparing it to other artifacts or even to the calls of animals it may have been designed to mimic. This convergence of technologies transforms a ruin from a silent sculpture into a dynamic sonic space. We can now run repeatable, testable experiments. How many people in the Colosseum could hear the emperor's pronouncement? Would a specific prayer in a specific temple have created a disorienting echo, intentionally disorienting worshippers? The answers are no longer speculative. They are a matter of simulation and data. This immense power to resurrect lost sensory worlds, however, carries a profound responsibility. It forces us to ask who has the right to recreate and share the sacred sounds of a culture that is not our own. The power to resurrect a sacred chant or a forbidden ritual carries a profound ethical weight. We are not merely recovering data, but handling the intangible soul of a culture. This responsibility forces us to confront difficult questions. Whose sounds do we have the right to recreate, and who gets to decide their purpose? The most significant consideration involves working with indigenous and descendant communities. For them, a specific drum rhythm or a shaman's song is not a historical artifact, but living cultural property, often imbued with deep spiritual meaning. Recreating these sounds without permission risks profound cultural appropriation, turning sacred heritage into a public spectacle. The ethical path forward is collaborative research. This means archaeologists and acoustic scientists partnering directly with community elders and knowledge keepers from the very beginning of a project. It is about asking, not assuming. Do you want this sound to be shared with the world? Are there protocols we must follow? In some cases, the answer may be that certain ceremonies should remain silent, their acoustic power preserved only within the community itself. Respecting that silence is as important as reconstructing any sound. Beyond collaboration, we must also acknowledge the inherent uncertainty in our work. Every acoustic model is an interpretation, built on layers of assumptions about materials, crowd sizes, and the exact pronunciation of a dead language. We must be transparent about these gaps, presenting our sonic reconstructions not as definitive recordings, but as educated, evidence-based hypotheses. This intellectual honesty is the cornerstone of ethical practice. Then there is the question of commodification. Is it appropriate to use the reconstructed roar of the Roman Colosseum in a blockbuster video game? Can the haunting melody of a Sumerian lyre be licensed for a film soundtrack? When done thoughtfully and with the consent and compensation of cultural stakeholders, such projects can make history thrillingly accessible. When done carelessly, they reduce a civilization's auditory world to a disposable special effect. These ethical challenges remind us that we are not technicians reviving noises. We are custodians of human experience. Navigating this complex terrain with humility and respect ensures that our quest to hear the past does not silence the very voices we seek to honor. This careful, ethical framework allows us to step back and see the entire field in its proper context, revealing why this auditory shift is more than just a scientific curiosity, but a fundamental reinvention of historical understanding. A single discipline cannot reconstruct a world alone. The true magic of hearing the past emerges when experts from wildly different fields gather around the same virtual table, speaking the shared language of sound. This is an interdisciplinary tapestry woven from threads of hard science, cultural insight, and historical detective work. The archaeologist brings the physical stage, the silent stones, and the artifacts. The acoustical physicist brings the mathematical laws that govern how a whisper will dance across that stage. The musicologist listens for the ghost of the melody, understanding the scales and rhythms that gave a culture its sonic identity. Meanwhile, the historian and philologist scour ancient texts for mentions of a specific street vendor's cry or the exact words of a ceremonial chant. Even environmental scientists join the chorus, contributing data on ancient climates and animal populations that define the foundational hum of the world. A description of a windy day in a historical chronicle suddenly becomes a crucial variable in an acoustic model. This collaboration is not just a collection of experts working in parallel. It is a true synergy where the puzzle piece from one field perfectly locks into the gap from another. Consider a historian's text that describes a specific oracle speaking from a crack in the earth. An acoustical model of that same cave might reveal a powerful, disorienting echo that would have transformed a normal voice into a booming, supernatural pronouncement. The historian's text explains the why, while the physicist's model reveals the how. Together, they solve a mystery that neither could have tackled alone. This fusion is what makes the entire endeavor so compelling. It demonstrates a fundamental truth about the past, that it was not compartmentalized. A ritual was physics, music, and belief all happening at once. To understand it, we need that same chorus of voices, each one essential to the final, resonant chord. This collaborative spirit does not end with the experts in the field, but extends outward, inviting all of us to consider our own place in the long, unbroken chain of human listening. That constant hum of traffic outside your window is the modern equivalent of Rome's clattering chariot wheels. Our own soundscape, filled with the ping of notifications and the thrum of ventilation systems, is just as complex and impactful as any ancient one. Examining the past gives us a powerful new lens for understanding the noise we live with today. The Roman emperor's ban on daytime chariots reveals a timeless truth, that urban noise pollution is not a modern invention but a perennial challenge of concentrated human life. Their struggle for quiet mirrors our own debates over airport curfews and regulations for loud motorcycles, proving that the conflict between communal noise and individual peace is as old as cities themselves. Just as the Maya engineered their pyramids to create sacred echoes, we now design anechoic chambers and silent retreats, searching for pockets of meaningful quiet in an overstimulating world. Their intentional soundscape highlights our own deep need for auditory experiences that are not just loud but significant. The acoustic principles perfected in the theater of Epidaurus, where a whisper could reach the highest tier, are the very same physics employed in the design of our greatest modern concert halls and legislative chambers. The goal remains unchanged: to make the human voice clear and compelling to every listener. This historical perspective is more than academic. It empowers us to make smarter decisions about our own world. Understanding how sound shaped ancient social life, from the democratic debates in the Athenian agora to the controlled rituals of Chang'an, informs today's urban planning. We can choose to design hospitals with sound-absorbing materials that promote healing, create parks that mask traffic noise with the soothing sounds of water, and build residential areas that prioritize acoustic privacy. This is not about eliminating sound, but about curating it. The past teaches us that every society creates a sonic fingerprint, a balance between vibrancy and tranquility that defines its quality of life. By learning how past cultures managed, celebrated, and were stressed by their auditory environments, we gain the wisdom to be more intentional about the world we are building for our own ears. This journey into the echoes of ancient cities ultimately prepares us to listen more carefully to our own, and to imagine what future archaeologists might hear when they try to reconstruct the sound of our time. The future of sonic archaeology is not confined to laboratories or simulations. It is walking with you through the ruins of an ancient city, your footsteps on worn stone triggering a chorus of voices and commerce that swells and fades with every turn. This is the next frontier, where augmented reality headphones will render a complete soundscape in real time, perfectly synchronized to your location. As you approach the entrance of a Roman bath complex, the faint murmur of conversation grows into a lively roar of splashing water and shouted greetings. The soundscape becomes a dynamic, interactive guide tailored precisely to where you stand and where you look. This personalized auditory time travel is powered by two emerging forces. Artificial intelligence now scours millions of lines of ancient text, learning to identify subtle sonic descriptors that a human researcher might overlook. A single mention of a specific bird call in a poem or the particular clatter of a loom in a legal document becomes a vital data point for the reconstruction. Meanwhile, advances in material science allow us to understand not just how a stone wall looks today, but how its original, less weathered surface would have reflected sound with far greater clarity. We are moving beyond the grand monuments to reclaim the soundscapes of battlefields, where the terrifying din of clashing shields and war cries would have been a psychological weapon. We are tracing the sonic journey of pilgrimage routes, where the changing sound from barren desert to rustling sacred grove marked a spiritual transition. Perhaps most importantly, the field is striving to become more inclusive, actively seeking the lost frequencies of the marginalized. What was the soundscape of a slave working in a villa's kitchen, dominated by the hiss of steam and the crackle of the hearth? What were the distinct auditory worlds of women weaving together in a gyneceum or children playing in a courtyard, their experiences often silent in the official record? The ultimate goal is a total sensory immersion, a virtual historical world where sight, sound, and even the scent of incense or baking bread combine to create an emotional understanding no textbook could ever provide. This vast, unexplored territory of unexcavated frequencies invites us to listen for the most profound and intimate sounds of all, the very expressions of human belief that once resonated in spaces of ritual and worship. A king's command in the great hall of Persepolis was not merely heard, it was experienced as an overwhelming force. The Apadana's vast, columned space was an acoustic instrument of statecraft. The precise arrangement of stone and space amplified the sovereign's voice, making it boom with divine resonance, while the petitions of his subjects were swallowed by the architecture, rendered meek and insignificant. This was not an accident of design, but a deliberate sonic strategy to manufacture awe and enforce a rigid social hierarchy. The ruling elite understood that controlling the soundscape was a direct path to controlling the minds of the people. In the hypostyle halls of Egyptian temples, this principle reached its zenith. As you moved from the bright, noisy courtyard into the inner sanctum, the space grew progressively darker, narrower, and quieter. The final chamber, housing the cult statue of a god, was a masterclass in acoustic engineering. A priest speaking from a specific spot would find his voice focused and projected by the converging stone walls, creating a sound funnel effect. To a supplicant, his words seemed to emanate not from a man, but from the statue itself. This was divine ventriloquism, a powerful illusion that made the stone idol speak, reinforcing the priestly class as the sole interpreters of the god's will. The Roman approach was more public but no less calculated. The voice of the emperor himself could not be everywhere, so it was multiplied through heralds and precones. These official criers, trained for vocal power and clarity, stood in forums and at major crossroads to broadcast imperial decrees. The sound of their ringing voices carried the immutable weight of law, transforming written text into an unavoidable public event. This created an acoustic network of power, ensuring that the state's commands penetrated the daily din of city life. Across empires, the same logic applied to rapid communication. The strategic placement of bells in Chinese watchtowers, bronze gongs in Assyrian forts, and the distinct wailing notes of Celtic carnix war horns on the battlefield all served one purpose: the instantaneous transmission of a command across a vast distance. A single specific sound could order an advance, signal a retreat, or warn of an invasion, turning a chaotic multitude into a coordinated instrument. Reconstructing these sonic levers of control reveals a cold political calculus. Every echo in a throne room, every projected chant in a temple, and every blast from a signal horn was a subtle form of psychological architecture. They were designed to impress the masses with the ruler's grandeur, intimidate rivals with an aura of unassailable authority, and condition the population to accept their place in a divinely ordained order. This calculated manipulation of the auditory realm for sheer political power presents a profound dichotomy, forcing us to ask how the very same physics of sound could be harnessed for an entirely opposite purpose: to dissolve the self into a collective, transcendent whole. A low, rhythmic chant begins to vibrate through the stone floor, rising up through the soles of your feet. You are an initiate in the Eleusinian mysteries, standing in the sacred telesterion. The air is thick with the smell of incense and the collective breath of hundreds. A sudden, sharp clash of bronze cymbals cuts through the drone, the sound echoing off the chamber's walls with a disorienting ring. In this confined, resonant space, the combined auditory assault is not merely for atmosphere. It is a precise technology, a carefully orchestrated sequence of sounds designed to overwhelm the senses, alter your heart rate, and guide your mind into a profound, altered state of consciousness. This was the sound of belief itself, a physical force harnessed for spiritual transformation. This principle of sacred acoustics is a global phenomenon, a universal human discovery that sound can build a bridge to the divine. On the Mediterranean island of Malta, the Hypogeum, a labyrinthine underground temple carved from solid rock, holds one of the most compelling examples. A specific niche, known as the oracle chamber, resonates at a powerful low frequency of 110 Hz when a person speaks into it. Modern neurological studies suggest this specific frequency can directly impact activity in the brain's prefrontal cortex, potentially reducing linguistic processing and heightening emotional and spatial awareness. The ancient priests who used this chamber were not just talking to the gods. They were using the very architecture to rewire the minds of their followers, making them more receptive to visions and revelations. Centuries later, though in a different era, the builders of Gothic cathedrals pursued a similar goal with different tools. They engineered vast, soaring naves not for clear speech, but for immense reverberation. A single chanted prayer in such a space would not be a crisp statement. It would blossom into a thick cloud of sound, a lingering auditory presence that seemed to hang in the air long after the monk's lips had closed. This created an overwhelming sensory experience of a world saturated with the divine, where every human sound was met and magnified by the stone itself. Far across the Atlantic, at the Andean center of Chavin de Huanta, we find perhaps the most sophisticated ancient system of acoustic manipulation. Here, priests used pututu, conch shell trumpets, whose mournful blasts could be heard for miles, calling people to ceremony. But the real magic happened inside the temple's labyrinthine galleries and underground ducts. Engineers have demonstrated that a person blowing a pututu in one specific courtyard could project its sound through a network of stone ventilation shafts, making it appear to emanate mysteriously from a statue of a god in a completely different plaza. The complex also features narrow, resonating galleries that create strange, metallic-sounding echoes, disorienting anyone who walked through them. This was not mere decoration. It was a full-scale acoustic theater designed to convince pilgrims that they were in the presence of living, vocal deities. The purpose of this ancient sonic technology was multifaceted. It marked sacred time with bells, gongs, and trumpets dividing the profane day from the holy night. It was believed to summon deities, the vibrations of drums and chants acting as a spiritual doorbell. Most importantly, it facilitated trance and forged an unbreakable collective emotional experience. When an entire community hears the same overwhelming sound, feels the same vibration in their chest, and shares the same awe, their social bonds are welded together in that moment. To understand these sacred soundscapes is to move beyond the written doctrine and touch the deep, non-verbal heart of faith. It is to appreciate that long before theology was fully articulated, humanity had already learned to listen for the voice of the transcendent and to build instruments of stone and air to help it speak. The sharp cry of a spice merchant in Constantinople cut through the air, a single thread in a tapestry of commerce woven entirely from sound. The ancient marketplace was a living, breathing entity whose voice was a vibrant, chaotic symphony. Step into the Grand Bazaar, and your ears were met with a dense overlay of competing noises, the shouts of vendors praising their silks and ceramics, the distinct clink of silver and bronze coins being counted by money changers, the anxious lowing of oxen brought for sale, and the rapid-fire gossip of traders who had journeyed from across the known world. This was not random noise. It was a highly structured, information-rich soundscape, the economic heart of the city laid bare for anyone to hear. The very architecture shaped this cacophony. Open courtyards allowed sound to swell and carry, while shaded colonnades created pockets where specific conversations could be heard more clearly. The materials of the goods on display themselves altered the acoustics, with sacks of grain absorbing sound while arrays of bronze pots and ceramic jars reflected and amplified it. An experienced ear could diagnose the city's economic health from this sonic environment alone. The sheer volume and energetic tone on a given morning could signal a recent good harvest and abundant goods, while a quieter, more tense atmosphere might hint at an impending shortage or bad news from a distant province. This soundscape was also a masterclass in auditory branding long before the term existed. Each profession cultivated its own distinct sonic signature. You did not need to see the money changers, you could hear them, their tables ringing with the precise, rhythmic clatter of coins being sorted and stacked. The auctioneers developed a unique, rapid-fire chant, a rhythmic cadence designed to build excitement and drive up bids. The fishmonger had a specific call to announce his fresh catch, different from the baker's cry for warm bread. This was a city navigating by ear. Beyond mere commerce, the marketplace functioned as the ancient world's most powerful social media network. It was the primary hub for the spread of news, rumors, and radical ideas. A story about a political scandal in the imperial court, overheard from a caravan master from the east, would ripple through the crowd, evolving with each retelling. A rumor of a barbarian army sighted on the frontier, whispered by a soldier in a tavern tucked between market stalls, could spark panic or mobilize a city's defenses. The flow of information here was as vital as the flow of goods, fueling the social and political life of the entire urban center. Reconstructing this commercial roar allows us to understand the incredible economic vitality and the complex social interactions that made these cities thrive. This public symphony of commerce, however, was only one part of the human experience. The moment a citizen stepped through their doorway, they left that cacophony behind and entered a radically different auditory world, one defined by the more intimate and protected sounds of domestic life. The thick wooden door of a Pompeian domus swung shut, muffling the city's chaos into a distant rumble. Inside, the soundscape transformed into something intimate and protected. The dominant noise was often the rhythmic, grating crunch of a slave grinding grain on a stone quern in the kitchen, the foundational pulse of the household's daily bread. From the hearth came the soft sizzle of oil in a terracotta pan and the crackle of the fire, sounds of warmth and sustenance. These were not public performances, but the private, essential sounds of life being maintained. The architecture of the home was a carefully composed acoustic filter. Bedrooms or cubicula were often small, with thick walls and heavy drapes to ensure near silence for sleep. Yet the central atrium or courtyard was an acoustic heart designed to channel sound. A child's laughter or a mistress giving orders to a servant in this open space would carry easily to the surrounding rooms, fostering a sense of connection and oversight. The materials themselves spoke. Plastered walls absorbed the sharp edges of conversation, while wooden beamed ceilings and mosaic floors created a specific, lively acoustic where footsteps clicked and voices gained a warm resonance. In wealthier homes, the gentle, constant trickle of a small impluvium fountain was more than decoration. It was a sophisticated form of ancient noise cancelling, its persistent white noise masking the intrusive shouts and cart clatter from the street, preserving the household's sonic sanctity. Many residences also doubled as workshops. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a loom's weights from a side room was the sound of the home's economy, of cloth being produced for use and for sale. The scratch of a stylus on a wax tablet, the clatter of ceramic bowls being set for a meal, the quiet murmur of conversation in the triclinium dining room as guests reclined on couches. These sounds paint a vivid picture of domestic rhythms. Reconstructing this private world is crucial because it lets us hear the lives of the ordinary people, the women, the children, and the enslaved individuals whose stories are often silent in grand historical narratives. We understand the separation of gender roles by listening for the distinct sounds of male-dominated business in the tablinum study versus the female-managed industry of the kitchen and loom. We grasp family dynamics by hearing how sound traveled or was contained between rooms. This was the sound of home, a sanctuary of familiar noise, but this domestic tranquility was never permanent. It was always vulnerable to being shattered by a sound that gathered every citizen from every home into a single roaring crowd. That roar of 50,000 voices in the Colosseum was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that could be felt deep in the chest. This was the sound of spectacle, an auditory weapon wielded by the state to build collective identity and provide a sanctioned outlet for public emotion. The architecture itself was a colossal amplifier. The elliptical shape of the arena and the steep, encircling stands created a sonic vortex, trapping and concentrating the noise of the crowd into an overwhelming, unified roar that was said to carry across the entire city on a quiet day. But the soundscape was far more complex than just the crowd. It was a carefully orchestrated drama of specific, brutal noises. Before any combat began, a blast from a hydraulic organ, the hydraules, would signal the start of the games, its powerful, sustained notes cutting through the anticipatory din. Then came the clash of iron on iron as gladiators met, the sharp, percussive ring of a sword striking a shield. The deep, guttural roars of starved lions and leopards echoed from the hypogeum below, a terrifying prelude to the beast hunts. And then, the most chilling sound of all, the collective intake of breath from tens of thousands of people, followed by a single shouted word, the crowd's verdict on a defeated fighter's life. This was mass communication in its most primal form. The theaters of Greece offered a more refined, but no less powerful, acoustic spectacle. Here, the goal was perfect clarity, not overwhelming force. The brilliant design of the theater of Epidaurus ensured that every whispered line of a tragedy, every subtle inflection of an actor's voice, could reach the spectator in the very last row. The sound of a protagonist's lament or the chorus warning was not just heard, it was felt with intimate precision, forging a shared emotional journey for the entire citizen body. Beyond the arenas and theaters, the city streets themselves became stages for sonic performance. A religious procession for the goddess Isis would flood the avenues with the rhythmic beat of sistrum rattles, the hypnotic chanting of her priests, and the anxious bleating of the animals being led to sacrifice. A Roman triumph was the ultimate orchestrated sonic event. The returning general paraded through the streets, was preceded by the deafening blare of long war trumpets, the litus and tuba. His soldiers sang rowdy, mocking songs to ward off the evil eye, their rough voices a stark contrast to the formal ceremony. The procession included the cacophonous clanking of captured enemy arms and armor, piled high on carts, a sonic trophy of subjugation. And all of this unfolded against the backdrop of the cheering, or sometimes jeering, populace. This was the crucial political function of the spectacle's soundscape. The roar of the crowd was a constant reminder to the ruling class of the people's presence and potential power. It was a safety valve, a way for the masses to express collective joy, anger, or grief in a controlled public setting. The state provided the spectacle, but the people provided its voice, a thunderous, undeniable force that shaped the rhythm of ancient civic life. A silent phalanx advancing through the morning mist could be more terrifying than any battle cry. This was the sound of conflict, a brutal symphony where acoustics were as vital a weapon as the sword or spear. The battlefield was a place of extreme sensory overload, a disorienting chaos of metallic screeches, the thunder of thousands of hooves, and the deep, guttural blast of war horns. Above it all rose the unified roar of infantry unleashing a collective war cry, a sound designed to summon courage in their own hearts and paralyze the enemy with fear. But woven through this cacophony were precise sonic commands. The Roman legions relied on the curved cornu and the long, straight tuba. Their distinct, piercing notes cut through the din, signaling advances, retreats, and shifts in formation with an efficiency that no human voice could match. Far to the north, the Celtic carnix, a bronze trumpet shaped like a boar's head with a movable jaw, emitted a harsh, wailing cry that was uniquely suited to unnerving opponents before the first blow was even struck. This was psychological warfare waged through sound. The acoustics of the terrain itself became a tactical consideration. A general would use a narrow valley to amplify the roar of his army, making his force sound larger and more demonic. Conversely, a dense forest could muffle the approach of an enemy, turning the landscape into an acoustic cloak. The sudden, silent advance of a disciplined force was often the most frightening sound of all, a void of noise that spoke of cold, calculated intent. Reconstructing these soundscapes reveals the true visceral horror of ancient combat, moving us far beyond sterile diagrams of troop movements. We can begin to understand the sheer sensory overload faced by a young hoplite in the Greek phalanx, his world reduced to the clash of his shield, the screams of the man beside him, and the overwhelming pressure of noise. This brutal, chaotic world of conflict existed in stark opposition to another carefully constructed soundscape, one that sought to impose order upon the human clamor through the measured voice of the law. The success of a Roman lawyer depended as much on his lungs as his logic. Step inside the echoing space of a basilica, the city's central courthouse, and you would hear the law in action, a performance where vocal power was paramount. High, vaulted ceilings captured the voices of orators, lending their words a resonant authority that seemed to emanate from the state itself. A case could be won or lost on the clarity of a single syllable, on the ability to project a passionate plea to the very back of a crowded gallery. The soundscape was a formal symphony of power, the sharp rap of a magistrate's staff for order, the steady drone of a court scribe's pen, the trembling testimony of a witness, and the final, booming pronouncement of a verdict that sealed a person's fate. This acoustic environment was designed to impress upon every listener the gravity and immutability of Roman justice, yet these spaces were not always perfect. A poorly positioned speaker might find his words swallowed by a reverberant corner, while a clever opponent could use the same echo to make his own voice seem larger and more commanding. The law was not a silent text but a living, sonic force. This principle reached its most chaotic and democratic form in Athens. Here, citizen juries of hundreds, sometimes thousands, would sit for hours in the open air of the Heliaea court, listening to plaintiffs and defendants argue their own cases without lawyers. The sound was a vibrant, contentious din of layered rhetoric, emotional appeals, and heckling from the crowd. A litigant had to be his own amplifier, his voice straining against the breeze and the rustling of restless citizens. The auditory experience was the justice, the collective act of listening and judging, making abstract concepts of right and wrong tangible for the entire community. In both Rome and Athens, the sound of the legal process reinforced a social contract, making the authority of the state something you could not just see, but hear. Yet for every formal proclamation from the basilica steps, there were a dozen unofficial whispers carrying news through the city's back alleys. A town crier's voice did not just share news, it was the news. In a world without digital feeds or printed headlines, information was a living, breathing thing, carried on the human voice and absorbed by listening crowds. The official word arrived with the commanding shout of a herald in the city square, a figure whose vocal power and clarity were as vital as the message itself. When he announced a new tax, a declaration of war, or the death of an emperor, the sound of his voice gave the words an immediate, physical weight that parchment alone could never achieve. This was the authoritative top layer of the ancient information network, but flowing beneath it through every street and alley was a far more vibrant and volatile current of sound, the river of rumor. In the tavern, the clatter of ceramic cups was the percussion for whispered political conspiracies. At the public fountain, the splash of water and the clang of buckets provided the backdrop for the latest scandal about a prominent citizen. The workshop, filled with the rhythmic tapping of hammers, was a hub for trade secrets and complaints about wages. These were the informal newswires of their day, where truth and fiction blended into a potent, shared narrative that could shape public opinion as powerfully as any royal decree. And then there were the keepers of the long memory, the bards and storytellers. Their recitations of epic poetry were not mere entertainment around a fire. The rhythmic, musical cadence of a tale like the Iliad or the Epic of Gilgamesh was a sophisticated mnemonic technology. The rhythm and the rhyme locked vast sequences of information into place, preserving histories, genealogies, and moral codes across generations. This was the community's living database, a sonic archive of everything it meant to be Greek, or Mesopotamian, or Celtic. Public architecture actively encouraged this constant exchange of information. The long, shaded colonnades of a Greek stoa were designed as acoustic corridors, where philosophers could hold court and merchants could share news from abroad, their voices carried clearly by the reflective stone. The public fountain was not just a water source but a social hub, its constant burble masking private conversations while its open layout made it a natural stage for public announcements. Reconstructing this soundscape reveals a society deeply woven together by the act of listening. Knowledge was not a solitary pursuit but a communal, auditory experience. It required being physically present, leaning in to catch a whisper, or standing silently in a crowd to absorb a proclamation. This total reliance on sound for memory and knowledge forces a poignant question. How many of these vital, ephemeral conversations have been utterly lost to us, their echoes faded forever into the silent stone they once filled? That familiar melody from your childhood instantly defines a place you can never truly leave. For ancient societies, this phenomenon was the very bedrock of civilization. Sound was the engine of cultural memory, a resonant force that wove individual lives into a collective identity. The repetitive rhythm of seasonal festivals, from the raucous processions of Dionysus in Greece to the solemn drumming that marked the winter solstice at Stonehenge, did more than mark the calendar. They synchronized an entire community to the turning of the year, reinforcing a shared sense of time and purpose. The hypnotic repetition of a Vedic hymn in India or a daily Islamic call to prayer did not just honor the divine. It carved neurological pathways of belief, making faith a physical, habitual experience heard and felt by all. This was how a people remembered who they were. The most powerful vessels for this sonic identity were the epic poems. The Iliad was not a book to be read in silence. It was a performance, a riveting oral event accompanied by the strum of a lyre. Its specific dactylic hexameter rhythm acted as a mnemonic device, locking vast sequences of heroes, gods, and battles into the memory of the singer and the listener alike. In the same way, the recitation of the Mahabharata, with its own distinct melodic patterns, was not mere storytelling. It was the sonic embodiment of Dharma, of cosmic order, its rhythms embedding a moral and historical code directly into the cultural psyche of generations. This was history as a lived, sensory experience. Everyday signals carried this weight as well. The sound of a specific temple bell did not just announce the hour. It summoned a whole way of life connected to that signal, a daily rhythm of prayer, work, and community that defined a person's place in the world. The loss of such a sound was a cultural catastrophe. The silencing of the great ram's horn, the shofar, after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, was not just a quieted instrument. It was a profound amputation of a people's auditory soul, a severing from a sacred rhythm that had structured their identity for centuries. The trauma of that silence echoes through the ages. By reconstructing these sounds, we do more than just hear old noises. We gain access to the emotional and mnemonic landscape of a people. We begin to understand how they used the physics of vibration and the biology of memory to build resilient cultures that could endure for millennia. We learn how they remembered who they were, where they came from, and what they believed through the echoes that filled their lives. This deep, inseparable bond between sound and identity points toward a final, unifying principle, one that connects every temple, marketplace, and battlefield we have visited. A newborn's first cry sounds the same today as it did in a Babylonian birthing chamber. This simple, universal truth connects every human life across the chasm of centuries. Our entire existence is framed by sound, from the lullabies that soothe us into the world to the morning songs that guide us out. The shared laughter that strengthens a bond, the urgent shout that signals danger, the whispered words of comfort in the dark, these are the timeless melodies of being human. The instruments and the languages may change, a Sumerian lyre giving way to a digital synthesizer, a Roman herald's cry becoming a smartphone's ping. Yet the fundamental human needs these sounds serve remain unaltered. We still use sound to forge connection, to express joy, to warn of peril, and to navigate the profound mystery of our own mortality. This grand tapestry of echoes we have been reconstructing, from the roar of the Colosseum to the sacred whisper in a Maya temple, does more than illuminate the past. It holds up a resonant mirror to our own lives. It reminds us that the citizens of ancient Athens or Chang'an were not so different from us. They too lived in a world saturated with meaning, a meaning that was carried on the very air they breathed, in vibrations we are only just beginning to decipher. The silence of the ruins was an illusion. They were once filled with the same messy, beautiful, and emotionally rich soundscape that defines our own experience. Hearing these echoes again, even through the filter of science and simulation, closes a circle. It allows us to recognize ourselves in the past, not as distant statues, but as living, breathing, listening people. Our journey through these lost soundscapes ultimately reveals that while history is often written in stone, it was lived in sound. The true conclusion of our journey is not a final destination, but a fundamental shift in perception. We have moved from the chaotic roar of Roman streets to the sacred whispers of Maya ball courts, from the digital precision of virtual models to the profound responsibility of reviving lost voices. The central, undeniable revelation is that history was never a quiet place. It was a vibrant, noisy, and emotionally charged world, a constant symphony of human and environmental sound. These auditory environments were not just background noise. They actively shaped daily behavior, enforced political power, facilitated spiritual transcendence, and forged unbreakable cultural bonds. To hear the past is to understand it with a new depth of empathy, to perceive our ancestors not as silent statues but as living, breathing people whose world was defined by what they heard. As the historian Bruce Smith reminds us, the history of sound is in many ways the history of everything. It is the story of communication, of community, of control, and of the very human need to make our presence known. Let this exploration be an invitation to listen more intentionally to your own world. Consider the soundscape you inhabit and the one you help create with every conversation, every shared melody, every moment of quiet. We would love to hear which ancient soundscape you would most want to experience for yourself. Would you stand in the Roman Forum as a politician's voice fought the crowd? Or perhaps listen for the sacred Quetzal's cry at Chichen Itza? Share your choice in the comments below. Thank you for joining this auditory adventure into the deep past. If you enjoyed unraveling this rich tapestry of echoes, please subscribe for more journeys into the enduring mysteries of our shared human story.